VloggerDome, the TV show, Episode 6, Animal Rights and Vegetarianism, featuring Glynos, and Vox Neruda, and Butch McKillbison.
Welcome to this 6th edition of VloggerDome, the TV show. This episode's about vegetarianism, or generally speaking, animal rights, kind of the same thing. Human responsibility to animals, however you want to phrase it. And yeah, we're going to do something not completely different in that I often have to make response videos to people's arguments, and so yeah, for this episode I'll engage someone in a conversation in video format, and pretty much demonstrate what I do a lot of the time and how it's done. And so let's begin.
Is this thing on? Is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Alright, I'm making a video for this guy in Mendham because for this VloggerDome thing, and cause this guy is what I would call a carnivore racist, okay?
Yeah, well, people say lots of things. They have lots of ways of saying what something is, and that's really not a very smart way to say something, actually. Bigot, you could say. Okay, he's a bigot against people who eat meat. But bigotries are based on something not relevant, something meaningless. And to like or dislike somebody based on a subject like how much torture they impose, depends on how you want to describe this, right? Is not an irrelevant thing. It's a character issue, and it's a reasonable way to judge each other. If we can't judge each other based on how much pain and suffering we can impose, then we wouldn't be able to judge each other based on anything. It's about the most important thing you could possibly judge somebody else regarding. And I think intelligence would realize that, yeah, that's about the only standard there is for defining what might be a good person or a bad person, or a good act or a bad act, is whether that act causes something that might be considered unnecessary pain and suffering. I don't think you can really make an argument saying that somebody can perpetrate unnecessary pain and suffering and it would be something that you wouldn't rationally argue with or critique as being unproductive or stupid or bad.
This is the voice of Radio Free Neruda.
34 years vegetarian. Not a damn thing to say. Nor his carnist peers. They're dead and buried. Go vegan.
Thinks that it's not a good thing for us to be killing and eating meat. And this Mendham guy thinks we should all become vegetarians,
Yeah, at least philosophically, at least in principle, okay, in ideal. So even if you didn't become a vegetarian, the real argument is just to recognize that you have an addiction or a vice, and that it would be better if people could gain their sustenance without doing this unnecessary harm thing. Yes, being a vegetarian means, yeah, let's not create any unnecessary harm. Let's get what I need to get through my life without doing damage to something that doesn't need to be damaged or hurt or harmed or tortured. And clearly the processing of meat, getting it from the environment, or creating it in the environment so you can get it from the environment, just harasses sentient feeling organisms, and there's no way to really argue they're not sentient feeling organisms, and that's bad. it's not a complex argument. I mean, it's just pretty obvious. And so the defense is, what is there to say it's okay to do bad stuff? You're human, you're special, God says so. I don't think any arguments exist to justify or defend, because it's basically just unnecessary harm and suffering caused for frivolous reasons like tradition and addiction. And again, it's not about you becoming a vegetarian. It's merely about you defining yourself or describing yourself for what you are, not very efficient, and that the future should do better. Just admit you kind of suck, and people should do better.
And yeah, I don't like that. I just so I thought I'm gonna use I'm gonna use my argumentation skills, and yeah, I'm just gonna kick his ass. Okay. All right. So hey there, Mendham. Okay, my name, I guess I should say real quick too, is it's Butch McKillbison.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't really matter to me, but fine. So I guess maybe I can make an argument out of just this idea of what it is that we're arguing. Are we arguing some kind of real thing, or are we just arguing tradition, arguing culture? So this represents a culture, right, of I like to shoot stuff because aiming and targeting and shooting stuff is fun. Yeah, meat tastes good, especially if it's cooked well and and the right spices are added. Let's admit that it doesn't taste good raw. Not too many people are fans of raw meat, scraped off of raw bones. Yeah, the argument really can't be one from nature, and the argument really can't be that you're just arguing culture. You're just arguing a habit, and you're saying this habit is really cool. So we as a society have generally agreed that some habits, some traditions like bullfighting or cockfighting or dog fighting or cat fighting or whatever kind of fighting you want to come up with is unnecessarily cruel entertainment. And I think we could applaud the human race for at least getting that right. And this falls into the same category. It just hasn't been qualified as one of those unnecessary, trivial brutalities that we have committed for no real good reason, except because dumb people came up with dumb traditions, and we can do a lot better than that. Something like that.
Alright, so people are telling me my entire life I'm a really good thinker. Okay, so I came up with a series of statements and maybe some questions. Okay, and I'm gonna say them, and then I'm sure Mendham is just gonna be totally blown away. Okay, so human beings, okay, have got meat eating, in our DNA. Okay, it's in the DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an argument that is made by a lot of people that they want to defend the tradition by saying it's something that's gone on forever, or it's something that has to go on. Clearly it doesn't have to. There's billions of people on Earth right now who either consume no meat or very little meat in their diet, and they do just fine. And when it's actually statistically analyzed, it's found that they live healthier and longer because of it. They might do it because of poverty. They might do it because they can't afford the indulgence of eating meat. It might not be because they have a philosophy that says it's abhorrent or wrong, but many do it because they know it's just not right. And there's no negative consequence for that behavior, and there appears to be all kinds of positive consequences towards living a better quality of life. Because the meat is basically not exactly healthy. It's not good for you. Your body can't metabolize it, and it certainly wasn't metabolizing. If you actually believe we were at some point eating raw meat, we certainly can't metabolize that. So there's nothing about our DNA that screams meat eater. The DNA screams, like all other great apes, a diet 99.99% vegetarian, and certainly not in any way health dependent on the consumption of meat, because raw meat will not sit well in a great ape's digestive system. It's not made for it. It's made to process carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables. That's what it's made to process. Grains and such. Wheat made human beings great, not meat.
We got steak and bacon and pork chops and fish sticks. You know, I got a couple of fish sticks all through me. My doctor told me I got fish sticks all over the place at me. My doctor said last time.
Yeah, that's funny. But this brings up the subject of what animals are, clearly some animals are on a scale, or we try to assume or try to understand what they're capable of. Now, mammals obviously have the same brain that we have, basically, in terms of its features and its parts. And we can clearly see they have much the same kind of emotional disposition and sensitive disposition, the same senses. And they're experiencing, we can imagine, much of what we're experiencing in terms of feeling good and feeling bad. When you get to something like a fish, well then, yeah, you're talking about a brain that's much more primitive. But the argument would be it's primitive in what way? It's not as smart, but it could be just as sensual, in that it's taking in a lot of sense data and reacting to it based on sensations that are positive and negative. So you see that in fish. You see that in a lot of primitive organisms that are quite capable of acting based on what's first created, which is a feeling, a reaction, an emotion, and that they use whatever intelligence they have, which may be limited, to come up with a strategy to react to what they're feeling. So they still feel fear and terror and pain. And this could go down to very crude organisms. Even insects may be quite capable of sensually feeling life, and we can't just ignore that if we're going to call ourselves intelligent. We can't just say we're just going to pretend they're little plastic toys that bounce around us. We have to recognize that they have a piece of us, that they have a substance that we respect in each other, and that we have no reason not to respect it in them.
I'm actually, I'm living in this bathroom right now because I can't afford my house. I lost my house because I gotta have fish stick removal. It's,
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people have distractions, and life is complicated and difficult. And so, this is difficult because you're saying, look, something you're habitized to, something you're comfortable doing, something that means something to you in your life, it gives you some pleasure, is something you're really not supposed to be doing. And so with all the other burdens of existence, yeah, I'm sitting here saying, yes, something that you derive pleasure from, you have to moderate that behavior. You have to find some other way to get to find your gratification. And the first argument I would make is that that's really not that hard to figure out, right? There's lots of foods that aren't made out of animal flesh that are perfectly delicious, and it really is doable. And it's only bad habits, again, and habits that can be reconstructed. The very fact that we have to eat something different every day, these are just habits people have. It has nothing to do with what they really need, and what they can habitize. They can gain new habits, just like they gain the original habits. This is changeable conditioning, not unchangeable conditioning, because they are just habits. Yeah, that's probably enough.
Kids, they don't like my way I smell, and it's just life when they're real hot. It's real hot. But the one thing and I don't know how much longer I am for this world, but I gotta make sure people keep on killing and eating animals. It's what drives me.
Right. So yeah, that's sort of it, though, right? These are just traditions. So it's like people think baseball needs to exist because they're a fan of baseball or football or whatever the thing is. So these are features or structures in their life, and because they exist, they think they should exist. And they never really analyzed them, and now they're addicted, simply. And instead of acknowledging that it's just an addiction, that it does have all these negative components, that it's not good for the environment, it's not good for your personal health, it really is just a nuisance attachment, and that if you were going to build a human being or make one, you wouldn't make one dependent on this if you could make one independent on it, because it is suspect at minimum. You have to concede that it's at least at minimum suspect behavior. They're mammals, okay? They're cousins evolutionarily. There's no reason for you to think they're nothing and that their suffering doesn't mean anything. It's just not reasonable, especially when you have a dog on your lap. You can just say, what am I doing? How silly is this? This dog is something, but the pig is nothing? You can make that make sense? That's logical? Come on.
And now it's time for Adventures of an Antinatalist.
So I understand you have a negative view of life, Glynos.
I suppose so, yeah.
I see, yes. And did this start after you got stabbed in the eye with a fork, or before?
Before.
I see. Yes. And how long have you felt this way, Glynos?
A few years.
I see. Yes.
Sorry, could you stop saying I see yes? It's actually really annoying.
Interesting. Are you annoyed with me, Glynos? Or with yourself?
No, it's definitely with you. I'm fine.
I see. Yes.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Glynos, I want you to know that this is a place where you can truly open up. If you want to swear, shout, or cry, you can do this here.
Okay. Thanks.
So, would you like to tell me why you're unhappy with your life?
I'm not.
But you said earlier that you have a negative view of life.
Yeah, life in general is a pretty moronic, chaotic, and unfair system, but I happen to get lucky with mine.
I see, yes. And why do you think life has been unfair to you, Glynos?
No, I don't. I'm fine. So far. We're talking about life in general here, not my life.
I see, yes. I can see that you're a very intelligent person. So you mentioned your life is chaotic. How so?
Jesus fucking Christ. This is not about me.
Glynos, I think you have a problem with projection. You feel that life hasn't been fair to you, and because of this, you believe that life in general isn't fair.
What? No, it's the fucking opposite. If anything, it's unfair that I live such an easy life when so many other people are going through hell.
Interesting. So you do think that life has been unfair to you?
Oh, please try to understand before one of us dies. My personal life has been better because of life's unfairness.
Adventures of an Antinatalist will be right back.
Okay, but this is another one. I'll work really, really hard about this one. Okay, look at my fangs. Okay? Look at my fangs. See my fangs? You can see, wait, see? You see my fangs? You see them? I got fangs. You see my fangs? Okay, well, I was meant, okay, so you see my fangs. Okay, you see them. You see the fangs. Okay, I was meant to tear flesh apart, to drink blood. I mean, deep down. Okay, look at this.
Yeah, so the argument from nature just fails. First, it's not an argument because it's not our nature. And every kind of biological fact points to the fact that we weren't eating meat until we acquired fire, and fire made the difference in terms of being able to find other things to eat if we had to, and that it was basically finding other things to eat if we had to. Not necessary to our function, just something we added, like a goat could add anything it wants to because it can. It can add it, it adds it, but it doesn't need to. There's no requirement to. It can live without it. A bear can survive without eating salmon, but if the salmon are there, it'll eat them because it gains, it eats the fat, which is, see, this is another part of it, right? I mean, people think it's eating meat when the bears are really just eating fat. And that's mostly what you're going to metabolize out of meat anyway, are the fat calories. Because the protein is basically not something that any organism likes to metabolize. Because it takes energy to break the proteins down into the sugar that you're going to use, your body's going to use. So you're basically wasting energy to make the energy. And there's a huge inefficiency in that. And we certainly don't have the digestive system that wants the kind of bacteria that would grow if we actually let the stuff sit in us long enough to process the protein. So, and that's why carnivores have a shorter digestive tract, is because they just give up on it. They don't see any value in trying to process it, and so most of the calories are expelled because they're too hard to acquire out of complex proteins. So just by a molecular argument solves this natural argument. Yeah.
Like, look at you. Okay, we were meant to be lions. Okay, lions. Okay, eating meat and hunting for like to eat the meat and eating the meat. It's
Yeah, well, hunting. Right, so I mean, you can just imagine human beings running across something, trying to catch something, trying to rip hide off of an organism, and then trying to get the flesh out of it without soiling it with the bacteria inside the organs. No practical hope of doing any of that in nature. And again, so it was only through fire that we found meat not only more consumable because it was tastier and easier to process or chew, because we basically are pre-processing it. Fire processes the meat into something different, and that's why it tastes better, and that's why it's less harsh on our internal organs. So it's just part of our technology. We found that we can technically do it, and so now we do it. But we're not dependent on it, and it certainly isn't our long tradition. It's not what we've been doing for most of our evolution. Most of our evolution, we have been vegetarians.
spiritual, okay? Alright, Jesus wants me to be a meat eater.
Yeah, that's sort of a good subject. It's just the idea that this is a tradition that is fundamentally defended through religion. And if people were philosophically free of any religious notions, that I think it would have occurred to human beings a long time ago to analyze the situation of the hierarchy in nature and maybe perceive themselves as the older brother to the other animals in nature, and to recognize that the real distinction between you and them is intelligence, not sensitivity. That it isn't the ability to feel that's deficient in animals. No, it's just that they don't do fractions and they don't have vocabulary. But they do have a very vital life as a feeling organism, and clearly can be tortured and tormented and can know what agony is. And so I think without religion, without this God saying it's okay to play with animals in this negative way, that it would have occurred to human beings a long time ago that there's something fundamentally wrong with this idea that we can just throw anything on the Barbie. You could also bring up just other, traditions, cannibalism in human beings. Clearly that could have caught on. And the fact that it would have caught on, does that mean that it's something we should be doing? We don't need to do it, is the bottom line. And it's clearly, sensibly, rationally, inescapable, that there's something more significant about you eating. There's a difference between eating a piece of grass and eating, a pig. They're different animals, and you got to treat them differently. You treat grass and trees differently than you treat cats and dogs.
Another thing I want to ask this Amendum guy is, how do you get your protein? Because the protein is so important. I mean,
yeah, well, that's one of these things too. Is there's all this pseudoscience in the world. They've always said you need all these food groups and you need these daily requirements. They say things like daily, like somehow your body cares about what day it is. Your body has maybe monthly requirements or weekly requirements, but it hardly has daily requirements. Clearly, we can go without food for many days, and we'll do just fine. The body's not made to eat every 6 hours or whatever the routine you're on. It can eat every 3 days. It can do it lots of different ways, and we can adapt to lots of different strategies in terms of acquiring what we need to survive. But protein isn't something we need to survive. Your body makes amino acids, and that's basically what the proteins are made out of. And your body just finds it obnoxious to have to tear the thing apart to be able to absorb it. Your body can't absorb proteins. It can only absorb the pieces of the protein, and then it has to remake them again. So why not just shorten and simplify the process for your body and feed it what it actually uses, which is sugar.
how do you get your B12? Where do you get your iron?
Right, well, iron's really not a problem, but B12 is kind of an interesting thing, just because it's something many organisms are dependent on, but the sourcing is kind of ironic or funny in the sense that it's really a byproduct of bacterial function, but it's always in the environment. It's always been in the environment. There was no way to avoid B12, so it wouldn't be even a problem to get B12 if you lived in nature, because it would be on all the surfaces around you. Everything would be basically, anything that a bacteria would have crawled on would likely be littered with B12. So anytime you consumed anything raw in the environment, you would likely pick up some amount of B12. It's everywhere. It's dirt. It's in it. And it's only because we cleaned up our life and sanitized our life and started boiling our life that B12 became an issue. And yes, that would only be found in these more complex foods that have it stored inside of protein molecules and all of that stuff. So I mean, it's only because of the fact that we started eating outside of nature in a sanitized environment that B12 became a problem. But it's not evidence of some dependency on meat, that we have a dependency to be aware of the fact that we're not eating dirt anymore in our food, and therefore we might need to supplement our diet with a vitamin. The vitamin, we got B12 not from meat, but we got it from the environment. So it's not evidence of some dependency on meat eating. It's just evidence that we've separated ourselves from the raw environment. Kind of a technical argument, but it's sort of a technical subject, and people just don't care about the truth. They just make stuff up.
Where do you get your omega-3? Because you can't make it through the day without this stuff. Another thing too is this bullshit about animals feeling. Okay, animals can't feel. Okay, they don't care about where we put them. Okay, they're lucky to have us. I mean.
Okay, so they can be lucky though. Yeah, but it's an interesting argument, just in terms of we really don't know, because we can't be an animal. We can't know what it's like to be one. You can't be a lot of things. You can't change your ethnicity. You can't change your race. You can't change your sex. You can't. Okay, you can, but you can't in any kind of total way, and really know what it is to be naturally a different thing. So yeah, we don't know what these animals are experiencing, and we can only deduce it. And I'm just saying, any deduction that assumes there's nothing happening because they don't know how to count to 10 is as silly as saying that human beings didn't feel before they acquired language. I don't think people would make that argument. If I could show them a videotape of human beings 60 or 70,000 years ago who weren't speaking a vocabulary and who weren't doing anything very sophisticated besides banging stuff with rocks and going ugh a lot, I don't think they would say their pain and their suffering doesn't mean anything. They're not really experiencing those emotions or feelings, that their love or their terror or their fear has no meaning. It would be kind of silly. That speculation would be unreasonable because there's just no evidence to justify it. Intelligence doesn't make us sensitive. Animals have been sensitive for a long time because our brain works that way. Our sensitivity creates a problem for our intelligence to solve. But that's all brain science. Yeah, let's not bother. Yeah.
This is the thing that I don't think this Amendment guy understands, is that animals are lucky to have us. We're looking after them, okay? We're making sure that they're not going to go extinct.
Okay, so these are the kind of things that are just called rationalizations. And so there's lots of these kinds of arguments that, okay, well, nature's brutal, so it's okay because nature's so much worse than we are, that it's okay for us to be molesters or violators or criminals. It's okay for us to commit crimes against their sentience because nature does it all the time. And that there's some sort of purpose in fundamentally preserving organisms that we manufacture. We've basically disabled many natural organisms through domestication and made them into organisms that couldn't even survive in the wild anymore. And so they're completely dependent on us caring for them to exist. Does that mean they should continue to exist, or does that mean that their life is worth living? Animals don't care about things like survival of their species, and all of these issues aren't relevant. And I think you can understand that what they care about is what's going to happen to them, how they're going to feel. And that's their agenda. And if you're just going to torture them, you can't be saying you're doing them a favor.
Okay, without us, they wouldn't be here anymore. Okay, and so we're looking after them. We're giving them food. Okay, they get to have sex sometimes and stuff. I think.
Yeah, well, let's not even get into that. Obviously, yeah, there's part of the cruelty is that their entire life is manufactured in this false and fake way, and everything's done in kind of a brutal and harsh way rather than any kind of, even like I said, nature's not really great, but in some cases we take bad nature a step further and make it even worse. And you could sort of make that argument for all the ways we manage their reproduction, even the idea of forcing a cow to have a calf so it'll produce milk, and then we take the calf away, and all this trauma. If it was happening to you, I think you would know it's not a good thing. I think you would know that listening to some person's rationalizations about how they're being considerate of you would be kind of really offensive. I mean, if cows could understand this conversation, I think you know what kind of, they'd probably give you a certain hoof and say something appropriate to the circumstance.
If they're not going to get into have any sex, okay, maybe we got something to think about, as far as how we're treating the animals. Because, they don't feel, so they don't really have sex. It's just a lapse in my logical, assessment of the situation.
Yeah, well, people do a lot of that, right? And, and people just don't care. They have too many things to think about in life, lots of distractions. And so they just say, okay, give me a simple answer to justify what I'm doing, and don't make me take responsibility for what may be horrible torture. And that's it. That's pretty much all that's taking place here, right? The facts just don't give you any latitude. If you look at the facts, it's impossible to come up with some sort of logic that says that it makes sense for me to cause unnecessary suffering. can't do that. It's not possible to make that logical. And these kinds of desperate rationalizations make that obvious.
On the subject of animal rights, it is proposed that having a harmable consciousness is a substantial and primary source of rights. It can be even more authoritatively stated that most of the animals being bred, imprisoned, tortured, and slaughtered for human consumption do possess a harmable consciousness. It is my claim that this apparent logical inconsistency is real and has rotten roots in nothing more than gluttony and self-glorifying rationalizations. The human species has no long biological association with the practice of eating meat. It is just a cruel, ignorant game it learned to play with fire. It's time to grow out of that cruel ignorance. The ethical crime of animal exploitation is no better than slavery. It's just exploitation for convenience, justified by bigotry. If retarded humans tasted good cooked, would you believe it appropriate to breed them and to mistreat them to satisfy your arbitrarily acquired food preferences? If you wouldn't, and you defend animal exploitation, then you likely have a logically inconsistent and rationally incoherent understanding of reality. In other words, you are a duplicitous idiot.
Sorry about that, but what I'm saying is that, they're lucky to have us, okay? They like where they are, they like what we're doing, and I think, honestly, okay, if you asked this chicken, this drummy, okay, you asked this drummy if in its life, if you could go back to where before it was a drummy, okay, and you asked the drummy, are you happy knowing now what I'm about to tell you, and what I'm about to tell you is that you died to be delicious? I just don't understand how there could be any other reaction to that, to say that I would like to die delicious, okay?
Yeah. So yeah, you can ask lots of questions to get to like the core of your values and how consistent you are, how much of a hypocrite or how duplicitous in any of this you might be. But yeah, you can make an argument to yourself. I could give you I could show you a version of yourself that was a vegetarian. Or I could show you a version of yourself that was, I can show versions of yourself smarter or dumber. And which one are you more likely to say is the right version, the version you should have been or could have been? And so it's really, again, it's not about saying, okay, I'm less than I should be, or I'm addicted, or I'm some kind of negative thing. And that the point is, let's just beat you over the head with the fact that you're being stupid, or you're being self-indulgent, or you're being selfish. It's really not the point. The point is to recognize that we should encourage each other to be better, all right, to do better. And we know that it's really not hard to make that better version of you. That all it means is you just take out a couple of things that happened in your maturation that got you dependent on this behavior, give you a couple of ideas, and those ideas will give you all the strength you need to resist putting your face in the bucket of fat. That you won't need to do it, you won't be compelled to do it, and you'll have a couple of ideas to just give you enough realization that this is a place I don't want to go. So again, just because you're covered in quicksand and you like the feeling of quicksand, it would be really stupid, and you've gotten kind of good at swimming through it. It'd be really stupid for you to say, yeah, everybody should go quicksand swimming. No. Bad idea.
I would like to die delicious. Hey Amanda, hey Amanda, hey Amanda, hey watch this.
Yeah, you get a lot of that on the internet, where people just want to mock ideas, and because it's people get defensive, right? Philosophy is an argument about your character. If you believe in something that somebody else believes is stupid or cruel, the arguments are going to get kind of personal. you really can't avoid if you're saying something you believe in, like your patriotism or something, and somebody mocks your patriotism. It just, or mocks the country that you're patriotic about, or is derogatory. Yeah, these conflicts are just going to make both, just going to make people defensive, and so the argument just becomes defensive, and that's unfortunate, but I guess it's not really avoidable. So just call it comic relief.
You like that? You like it? Vegans are too preachy, okay? Yeah, they're intolerable. I mean, they're obnoxious. I mean, can't they just shut up? I mean,
yeah, but that would be stupid, right? It'd be stupid for them to say, I see something that's fundamentally wrong, I now shut up about it. So yeah, most of us should be grateful that most of the people who did something about slavery didn't just shut up. It's kind of good because, yeah, we don't have to deal with that problem. So anything that advances us out of some kind of sewer of, crude stupidity, we should be grateful for the people that kind of forced the issue. So, yeah, but there can be argument's always going to be difficult, and what kind of argument's going to mean something to somebody is also always hard to predict. You can't tailor it for every person to get to their core, what means something to them. Celebrity endorsements help, but yeah, you do have to argue. So yeah, it's an argument.
their mamas ever tell them that they gotta clean everything off their plate, okay? What's wrong? What's wrong, vegetarians? What's wrong, vegans? Don't you know how to clean your plate? Another thing about this vegetarian.
So again, that's another argument from tradition, I suppose. So again, but just recognize it's just a tradition. It's just a bad habit. It's just like, the Colosseum and feeding Christians to the lions or some other thing. And then when people have it taken away, that one generation says, "Oh, gee, I sure missed the spectacle." But the next generations don't miss it because they're never dependent on it. They never had an attachment to it. I grew up eating meat all the time and every meal, every dinner meal anyway. And, as I became vegetarian, for a while there was moments where I'd say, gee, I would have liked that, or that smell seemed very difficult to resist. But eventually it all became something you don't miss at all. I mean, and some of it even becomes repulsive in hindsight. So it's not really an argument from if I can do it, you can do it. It's just an argument saying, yeah, it's always irritating to change, but it's not that hard to change some things. And this is one of those things that's not that hard to change. It's not a real addiction. It's just a psychological addiction. It's not a physical addiction. You're not going to really suffer. You're only going to be inconvenienced. And the only thing that's going to inconvenience you is some kind of stupid notion. If you know it's bad, it's pretty easy to avoid doing it. Yeah.
Thing is that, okay, look at me, okay, I'm healthy, okay, I'm healthy because I eat meat, okay, you can't be a healthy human being and not eat meat, okay, look how strong I am, okay, I'm as strong as the oxen I eat,
Yeah, I guess you're as brave as the chicken you eat. But anyway, there's really, whatever surveys have been done, whatever statistical information exists, and there's not enough of it, there should be more of it, but it all basically points in one direction, that, yeah, if you're going to live healthier, that is, you'll go to the doctor less, it's the apple a day thing, and you'll live longer if you don't eat meat. Meat doesn't do you any good. It's not giving your body anything it really needs, it's just creating more work for it. It's just, if you really think about it, I mean, meat, the complex chemical compounds, greasy, sticky stuff. Okay, that's what it's like, right? It's gummy and chewy and thick, and you can just imagine what that's doing to the insides of you. The fact that it's hard to clean off of dishes should indicate to you that your body's probably having a hard time cleaning it out of its crevices also.
Oh, and you just needed to be healthy. Okay, is what we need as human beings, and you just needed to be alive, and you needed a lot. Okay, human.
Right. Yeah, so that's all kind of like wishful thinking, because then it'd be okay, right? You could just say you need it. But what if we actually did need something that was horrific? If we needed to drink the blood of, baby humans? What if there was a species of animal that was better than us? And I have to come up with some reason why we would have some advantage over them in terms of being able to control them. But let's say we could, just because they were very passive, let's say. They were smarter than us, and they felt more than us. So in the two most important aspects, they were better than us. But they had no capacity to violently react or defend themselves. What would your responsibility be then? Even if you were totally dependent, you couldn't understand that some humanoid that was better than you in every respect, except it wasn't capable of defensive violence. You should consume it. You should vampire it. Would you make rationalizations? And I think the argument is, yeah, you probably would. And they would be stupid. And it's stupid to make rationalizations when it comes to other mammals. These other mammals have just as much capacity to suffer, to experience torture, as you do.
And now back to Adventures of an Antinatalist.
Just a moment, Glynos. Thinks life hasn't treated him fairly.
What are you writing down?
Why are you so concerned with what I'm doing, Glynos? Do you have a problem with control?
If I had a problem with control, I would have stuck that fucking pen up your ass by now.
I see, yes. Glynos, concepts of fairness exist only in our minds. Do you understand this?
I understand it. You're just wrong.
Interesting. How so?
Well, it's like this. It logically follows that if two students take a course and both attend the same classes and both get the same result in a test, it would be fair to give them the same grade. Now, if the student with blonde hair was given a higher grade because he had blonde hair, that would be unfair. Based on logic, not based on any social conditioning or any other mush.
And did this happen to you at school, Glynos?
What?
Did you feel like the teachers preferred the students with blonde hair?
No, it's just an explanation of how the idea of fairness can be a logical construct that exists whether the idea is in a mind or not.
And how does this relate to real life?
It's an analogy.
I see, yes. Go on.
Well, I fell out of a vagina in the UK, so I'm rewarded with sufficient food, water and healthcare. But most people who fall out of vaginas in the third world are punished with insufficient food and water and barely any healthcare. That's unfair.
But that's not how the world works, Glynos.
Exactly. That's why the world is unfair, and that's why I have a negative opinion of life. You can't just write something down every time you lose an argument.
Glynos, why do you think we're arguing?
Stop changing the subject. Do you now understand the basic concept of logical fairness and unfairness or not?
This session is about what you think, Glynos, not about me.
But you can't just make up a bullshit claim, then change the subject after you've heard the counterclaim. That's not fair.
Glynos, I've already told you. Fairness is a concept that exists only in our minds. Do you understand this?
Oh no.
Beings have been eating meat for like hundreds of years, and so why stop?
Yeah, hundreds. Yeah. So again, but the argument from nature, again, our ancestors, our long ancestors clearly were vegetarian. All the great apes are vegetarian. Our physique, our body has not a carnivore written all over it. What we are, who cares? But what we have written all over ourselves is not a carnivore.
Nah, we got a good thing going, and why stop? It's just become a tradition. It's our identity.
True. Yes, people live by it and they live on it, and but it's a tradition that, like many traditions, is stupid. It's bred or fostered or made possible because people were ignorant, and we're not ignorant anymore. We're not stupid. We're not driven by dogmas, silly notions of Adam and Eve and animals created for our use and purpose. No. We can understand the biological fact that these are our ancestors of a sort, and we have an obligation to them, just like a big brother might have an obligation to a little brother.
Why the hell? Why that? I just don't understand why these people, wanna lay this guilt trips on me and make me.
Yeah, well, see, again, that's part of the problem with the communication problem, is that it's not a desire to have you inconvenienced at all, or a desire to hurt you, or a desire to cause you any kind of emotional pain. The point is they're defending, something that's being hurt a lot more than the pain that's going to cause you to recognize what you're doing isn't right. And certainly it's going to prevent a harm greater in the sense that if you just don't advocate for it, if you stop defending the behavior and endorsing the behavior will go away. And if it goes away, then there's no need to inconvenience anybody and there's no harm created. You just have to admit that, you just have to concede that it's better for humans not to be dependent on meat than to be dependent on meat.
Feel bad about who I am, because I don't feel bad about who I am. No.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to do that, and so that's sort of the problem. So they just rationalize what they are. They rationalize their addictions and make excuses for them. I've been a cigarette smoker most of my life and been addicted to nicotine, but very rarely did I ever resort to the silly excuse of defending nicotine or defending tobacco as anything but a vice and an addiction, something that shouldn't be perpetuated in anybody, that if I had it to do over again, I would choose not to be an addict. I would choose to stop that first cigarette, to prevent it before it happened. So, conceding that what you have become isn't good, isn't as painful, isn't that bad a thing to have to do, but it's a lot more desperate if you're going to sit there and try to defend, because you can't accept that there's part of your character is not as good as it should be. Is that really that hard to do? Just admit that part of your character isn't as good as it should be? Come on.
Yeah, our civilization, one day they're gonna find this out and they're gonna say that I'm right, Our civilization was built on bacon. Eating meat.
Yeah. Well, that is an interesting story, though, the whole conflict between the Neanderthal and the modern humans, and the fact that the older version died out and the newer version took over, and the newer version was basically grass cutters, grain eaters, and the old version was a meat eater. They were bigger and they were stronger, and yet they died. They didn't make it. They went extinct. But not that simple competition says anything in and of itself, but just got to be recognized that even our history isn't as the worst of the meat eaters, the ones who ate meat because of the fact that fire gave them the ability to do it. The worst of them, the ones who ate the most meat, aren't the ones that survived. It's the ones that ate the least, in terms of the human-on-human competition.
It helps you stay thin. Makes you live longer, too. Another thing, too, is if you don't raise children to be meat eaters, they're gonna die, They're gonna get weak, They're not going to know who they are. They're not going to have any connection with reality. Okay, they're not going to be able to, you know why? Because they're either going to be brain damaged, or they're going to be dead, or they're going to be gay, or they're going to be all three.
Yeah, well, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, I guess you can just keep talking about rationalizations. But yeah, that's really what people keep saying. They just try to keep defending it because we've always done it. And so they just want to use this argument from tradition and assume that anything good about humans is tied to this somehow. People do that with sports. They'll defend sports and they'll talk about, well, you need it to become, to know how to be a graceful winner and to be a graceful loser and do all these, and we don't see any evidence of people doing any of that graceful part. We see these obnoxious, dancing in other people's faces and doing all this, So I'm just saying none of this character that they say is necessarily learned through this activity is even demonstrated in the reality. But obviously these rationalizations just make excuses. So instead of calling sports what it is, a silly soap opera, they try to make it integral to developing human character, that we need to somehow beat the crap out of each other in silly, pointless competition to learn how to be human. And most people doing that, it could be argued, are the ones doing things that are very not so good. Beating people up and, beating their wives and doing all kinds of horrible things.
Alright, and then the last thing I'm going to say, okay? I'm a free man. I'm going to eat whatever the hell I want, okay? And that's just final, okay? You can't say anything about that, and you can't stop me.
Well, I can say things about it, and I'll do that. And yeah, maybe I can't stop you. But eventually, that's the sad part of this, is that these kind of conflicts about basic reality have often ended in these horrible, the Civil War was just awful. Probably the worst war. And yeah, and it was just totally unnecessary, because in hindsight you could just say, we actually had to kill people over this. People couldn't let go of it. They couldn't let go of a dependency, on a terrible abuse. Then that's just the sad, tragic truth of what it is to be human, that people let go, that it sometimes takes a lot of muscle and a lot of energy and a lot of waste to break people free of bad ideas and delusional attachments, lies and nonsense. That's kind of depressing.
Okay, meat eating is going to go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, okay?
Well, nothing's going to go on forever and ever and ever. And human consumption of meat probably won't go on, just because it's impractical as the future gets rougher and rougher. It's going to become more and more expensive to eat meat, and so certainly your type won't be able to do it anymore.
Want to see more of VloggerDome? Want to make a counter-argument to anything said in this episode or one of our others? Please visit us at www.vloggerdome.com. See more episodes, conversations, extras, contests, live events, and more on our YouTube channel, VloggerDome. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and come chat with us on the Video Soap forums, where you can make text arguments that might even end up on the show. We hope to hear from you. Join us next month for VloggerDome episode number 7, Fair Economics. See you then!